beautiful like a fresco and fascinating for its idiosyncrasies, Street Fighter III Third Strike is a melting pot of both popular culture and fighting game design. This is the Annotated Third Strike.
Welcome to the world of Street Fighter 3. Prepare for the battle. Well, I got the picture.
In sports, your coaches will tell you second place is the first loser. This is a driver, an axiom to motivate you to win at all costs. But it's just as much a warning, a reminder that to win is to be peerless, and you don't want to be down there with the rest of them. The Street Fighter franchise has something of a complex relationship with this phrase. Certainly the player is meant to win. As a competitive video game played to full potential by two equally skilled people, there are winners and losers. As the series has matured over the decades, so too has its competitive nature and of those that play it. A fighting game can certainly be enjoyed as a single-player experience, and developers try their best to take this into account as they place their own stamp on the genre. But the genre quickly evolved past that experience. Street Fighter is a game made to be won or risk being thrust into the crowd of losers. That single-player experience is where things become vague. After all, the undisputed Street Fighter mentions an anecdote with franchise producer Akira Nishitani that the Japanese arm of Capcom had envisioned the first Street Fighter and its famous sequel to be single-player games, though he and the dev team of World Warrior always wanted to make the game competitive. But as single-player experiences go, there is an overall disparate story to each game, told through cast endings. With dozens of characters armed with the task of beating a final boss, it can be hard to suss out who the actual, quote, winner of any given Street Fighter tournament really is from a plot perspective. While there is certainly a segment of the fanbase that would love to debate you on this topic, the reality is that you, the person with the controller, is the winner if you see an ending, no matter which character you choose. If you beat Gildan, there is no second place, there are no losers. But this is not Street Fighter, and certainly not Third Strike. In an interview published in Japanese arcade magazine Gamist, Third Strike producer Noritaka Funimizu stated that this game is made to cater to the hardcore competitive scene, which is maybe any fighting game's final evolution. The franchise has always been competitive, of course, even though it may feel as though it was an afterthought when it began in 1987, but this one was purposely made to be played competitively. After all, this is a game about one-on-one combat, and against a human component, there are plenty of losers. The genre that Street Fighter helped codify is bound into the crucible of competitive play. Still, digging deeper, Street Fighter is just as bound to its ersatz leading man, Ryu. Go to a party or meet friends at the bar that don't regularly watch videos like this one, and bring up Street Fighter 2, and chances are good that someone will utter a Hadouken, a term now affirmed to be in our shared cultural lexicon. Someone might even jokingly put on a headband, signifying that everyone knows Street Fighter because Ryu is Street Fighter. But even they, like you, know that this is only a half-truth. There was always Ken. Ryu, on an elemental level, represents the grand myth of fighting games and martial arts culture. Ken, however, is something more. Without Ken, the Street Fighter franchise as we know it would exist in wildly different ways, and he represents the backbone of its recurring themes, motifs, and larger ideals. Ken is the rival, the friend, the sparring partner, all things necessary to help you win. From the beginning and as far back as the first Street Fighter, Ken represents competition in video games by virtue of simply existing. A player choosing Ken in those early days was a willful act of competition, to go toe-to-toe with player one. But Ken was always, in the grand scheme of things, second place to Ryu. Third Strike, though, proves how wrong this is. Ken's incremental evolution and pronounced division from Ryu over time not only serves him well in turning him into a distinct entity, but eventually crowned him into the pantheon of gods among the Third Strike series cast. As the Street Fighter II series progressed, a misconception among the casual observer pigeonholes the character into a flashier version of the franchise main man. On one level, that may have been true. The Street Fighter III games, though, turns this flashiness into multitudes of practical use, which is why some of the best-known players around the world look to Ken as their go-to choice on the character select screen. It is that evolution that begins our discussion. Though one can easily find reference on the internet detailing Ken's growth from Ryu replicant to Third Strike Ubermensch and beyond, it's worth briefly reiterating it, if only to prove how great he is in this series. Yes, he was a mirror of Ryu in both the first Street Fighter in 1987 and Street Fighter II World Warrior in 1991, as is common knowledge. The famous 3 special moves and the entirety of the normal moveset being identical. At the most base level, Ken represented the opportunity for 2 people with the exact same tools to prove their mettle. It is these two games that establish the Street Fighter franchise's fixation with that equitable level of rivalry and how it finds ways to break it. Ken infamously was only available for use to challenge a Ryu player in the first game. World Warrior, though, made him selectable from the start, and the only true, quote, mirrored character in the game until Street Fighter II Champion Edition in 1992, where selecting two of the same character became a franchise mainstay. The fact that they were so identical led to no limit of fan supposition of factual differences between the two, the most famous being that Ken was somehow stronger, with Ryu being faster. While Capcom staff over time have maintained that they were wholly identical, we know now that this comes with a small but significant caveat. Street Fighter II producer Yoshiki Okamoto recently released a video recounting how a retailer put the game into something of an autoplay mode to test the strength of Ryu versus Ken, and found that Ken had come out with more wins proportionally. When the team investigated this, they found that Ryu incurred additional damage from a counter hit of his Shoryuken, an effective system of counterattacks that they had dubbed Core, which was eventually dropped during the game's development. The team had forgotten to remove it from Ryu's uppercut, making neither character stronger, but Ryu ultimately weaker. Champion Edition, though, began a gradual shift to subtly alter Ken so players could eventually decide it for themselves. The famous Shoryuken, for example, had extended distance and added hits where Ryu's remained one hard smack to the jaw. The gulf continued to widen this way throughout the Street Fighter II series, culminating in 1994's Super Turbo, which finally altered Ken's normal moveset while adding what fans call his array of funky kicks, which have become nearly as defining as his Flaming Dragon Punch. By the time that further sub-series of Street Fighter games had debuted, like Alpha, the EX games, and even the Versus crossover series, playing Ken was different than playing Ryu by design. On the surface, they're of course similar, and neophytes to the Church of Street Fighter can play them in nearly identical ways. In practicality, though, and definitely at the intermediate level on up, they can be leagues apart. This same but different ethos lends to his overall character design, even from the beginning. And it's not just the differences in their color palettes. Ken is half Japanese and half American, something that fans have inferred for years was retconned into his history, though proven incorrect by Twitter user rcount. On the original arcade flyer for the first Street Fighter game, both he and Ryu's names are given in ornate kanji, something not reserved for foreign names, which are spelled with the Japanese katakana alphabet. The later All About Street Fighter III guide by Studio Bent Stuff, released concurrent with New Generation's arcade release, confirms his heritage. He's also one of the few characters in the overall franchise to have an official last name, Masters. This is tied to the 3.5-inch action figure line of the original Street Fighter II cast made by Hasbro in the mid-1990s to tie in with the toy manufacturer's G.I. Joe line of figures. Ken and Ryu were both given last names, with Ken's surname later mentioned in the animated Street Fighter II feature film in 1994, before being assumed into formal game canon in Street Fighter Alpha 2 in 1996. Funny enough, this is also referenced in one of his Third Strike win quotes. Hoshi, the family name given to Ryu for the toy line, never surfaced again. The name Ken has several layers of meaning. Certainly the English name of Ken can be short for Kenneth if it's shortened for anything at all. In Japanese, Ken is also a common abbreviation of several longer names like Kenji, Kentaro, and perhaps most important to this character, Kenshiro, which is the name of the main protagonist of Bronson and Tetsuo Hara's Hokuto no Ken, known in the West as Fist of the North Star. The word Ken in Japanese can mean fist, hand, or punch, but in the context of Fist of the North Star, we can see Ken's influences laid bare. In the comics and later animated adaptations of Kenshiro's adventures, students of an unnamed Assassin's Fist martial arts compete with each other for dominance, though the stakes are admittedly much higher in the story's nuclear wasteland. As noted in the flyer for the first Street Fighter mentioned earlier, Ken and Ryu are practitioners of an unnamed martial arts style that fans have occasionally dubbed Ansatsuken over time, which is a word that originated in Fist of the North Star. The nomenclature of the Street Fighter hero's martial art has mutated several ways over the years, as covered in the Shawn episode of this series, though fans have settled on calling Ken and Ryu and their ilk Shoto clones. The Fist of the North Star character's master is also named Ryuken, a word that translates into Dragon Fist or Dragon Punch, and you can likely see how much of an influence this work had over the original Street Fighter design team and their successors. This is a seminal work of manga that shouldn't be new to viewers of this video series either. As time has shown, and will show again, it is a significant influence on Capcom design staff. Ken is likely modeled after Kenshiro's ex-friend and rival Shin, a practitioner of an adjacent school of martial arts to the hero, and the Fist of the North Star saga's first major adversary. The flowing blonde hair and long shared friendship are obvious traits that were replicated, and thankfully none of Shin's psychopathy. But to talk about Ken's design inspirations with any real depth is to talk about Benny the Jet Urquidez. A former full-contact martial arts pioneer in the West, Urquidez was a boxing and Shotokan karate prodigy before moving on to American kickboxing dominance in the 1960s and 70s, as full-contact martial arts training was in its infancy outside of Japan. Urquidez eventually found himself in film roles and as a Hollywood stuntman starting in the 1980s, including famous fights in films like Wheels on Meals from 1984 and Grosse Pointe Blank in 1997. Also something of a personal fighting trainer to the stars, Urquidez is the longtime coach and teacher for people like John Cusack, ex-Van Halen frontman David Lee Roth, among others. Urquidez's influence on Japanese pop culture is curiously wide. Again found by Twitter user rcount, Urquidez's first press conference in Japan for a kickboxing bout in the mid-1970s had him describe himself as, quote, a full-contact martial artist. This evidently led to some understanding that the term martial arts was a fighting system in and of itself, which was then codified in the manga Square Jungle by Iki Kajiwara and Kentaro Nakajo, which has a main character that bears more than a passing resemblance to the American fighter in his trademark red pants. If you were to look at a profile of video game characters that list martial arts as the system of fighting they're trained in, it's because of this guy. Fans also like to point to another American full-contact karateka from the 1960s and 70s as an inspiration for Ken, Joe Louis. Another pioneer of American kickboxing and full-time fighting, Louis was a Marine stationed in Okinawa in the 1960s where he found that he too was a martial arts savant. A fighting system polymath that trained in a variety of styles with a variety of teachers, including Jeet Kune Do from Bruce Lee himself, Louis enjoyed a storied fighting career until his death in 2012 from a brain tumor. Louis was often photographed for martial arts magazines wearing a red dogi as well, and typically shirtless. It's more likely that Louis is the inspiration for lost Street Fighter character Joe from the first game in 1987, but since most characters from Capcom games tend to be amalgamations of pop culture figures, you can make a case that Louis is also in Ken's DNA. In terms of his appearance in Third Strike, Ken's DNA is front and center. His win quotes often mention his son Mel, who debuted in Ken's ending in a crossover game X-Men vs. Street Fighter in 1996. Mel's next official appearance was in Ken's ending for New Generation in one of the more comedic outros of the game. As Third Strike is the final game in the Street Fighter timeline as of this video, he of course appears in the ending of this game as well, as an extension of poor Sean's ending. All of these appearances are shared by his mother Eliza, who fans first saw in Ken's ending in Street Fighter II World Warrior in 1991, with a sprite famously redrawn several times between updates to the arcade board and home versions of the game. These two characters appear frequently in the various franchise tie-in media as well, including appearances in the animated film in 1994, the Street Fighter Gaiden manga in 1996, and the Street Fighter III manga adaptation Ryu Final in 1998. As both endings of the games are lighter in tone than that of the other cast members, you can gather some of Ken's personality in them. Always more brash and hot-headed in his appearances than Ryu, descriptions of him in gaming magazines near Street Fighter II's release in 1991 labels him as arrogant, brash, attractive, and naturally talented. Basically, he's either every villain from every 80s teen comedy or all the assholes you went to high school with distilled into one person. This arrogance is reflected with his win quotes, and also in his rival match dialogue with Urien, which doesn't line up with any narrative threads in the game and looks to be something of a throwaway meeting. Though it could be a reference to the previously mentioned Ryu Final manga by Masahiko Nakahita, as Ken was the only character to meet and battle Gil in the comic series, and they too had a similarly shared dismissive interaction before the bout started. His personality is also on display in his rather loud second impact background, which is the only time in the Street Fighter III series that he owned his own real estate, since he shared the dojo stage with Ryu in New Generation. For Third Strike, Ken returned to divvying up locations, and this time with Street Fighter III leading man Alex. Though the color palette is changed to imply an evening hour, you'll notice that the clock in the background still reads the same time that it does when fighting Alex, making the 9:27 p.m. time listed in the single-player opponent select screen a little suspect. Similar to Chun-Li, Ken's voice actor has never been consistent over the course of the franchise. For most games after the Street Fighter II series, including the Alpha games, the crossovers, and Arika Street Fighter EX series, he was voiced by Tetsuya Iwanaga, who is perhaps most famous for playing Kensuke in the various Neon Genesis Evangelion anime. His actor changed for Street Fighter III New Generation and Second Impact to anime and gaming actor Koji Tobe, who you would recognize as the Shiso from the animated adaptations of Naruto, as well as Yun in those games. He was replaced in Third Strike with Yuji Kishi, who has voiced the character in every appearance since, all the way through Street Fighter V and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. As mentioned in the Sean episode of this series, Ken was not initially planned to be in the Street Fighter III games and was only later added when development became protracted and the game needed to be shipped. This is according to an interview with Street Fighter III series producer Tomoshi Sadamoto on the Capcom Fighters Network website. The weight of his presence is certainly felt though, as Ken is a prominent tournament mainstay. In fact, you could say that Sadamoto and his team nailed it on the first try, since he's relatively unchanged from New Generation to Second Impact to Third Strike, outside of some larger quality of life improvements that all cast members share. In an interview found in Third Strike's secret file promotional flyer and translated by Shmuplations, the developers had planned to add things to Ken but exercised restraint. He's quite a one-trick pony character, they said. And even if you suck, he's strong enough to bury many other characters. This leaves us to wonder if they had planned to make him top tier from the beginning. But the reason he's so strong are a combination of several factors. Let's put it in a nutshell. First, Ken simply has a tried and true moveset that many players knew all too well at the time Third Strike was released. One of the oldest of the legacy characters, many players cut their fighting game teeth learning to toss fireballs and then Shoryuken jumping opponents. The second and more specific to Third Strike is that Ken can dish out a fair amount of damage without having to burn his meter resources, a trait that several characters lack. Yet more specific to this game is the nature of the parry system. Referring back to the episode of this video series on the subject, a character with more hits added to their moves, like Ken's Hard Punch Shoryuken for example, makes an opponent parrying those moves work harder, and more hits means more parries. One of Ken's more pronounced differences from Ryu are these added hits to his attacks. Finally, like the other top tier gods of Third Strike, Ken is also packing one of the best super arts in the game, the Shippu Jindai Kyaku, which we'll detail in a moment. All of this is to say then that Ken is often considered one of the 3 best characters in the game, perhaps just behind Chun-Li and Yun. In fact, you could say that he sort of straddles a certain gap between the two. While Yun has some of the best movement in the game and a fantastic set of tools, his nearly broken Genei-Jin takes significant practice to use well. Chun-Li, on the other hand, is a little on the bland side, with her meager combo potential but freakishly powerful and easy to use Hoyokusen Super. Ken falls somewhere in the middle, with a great toolset and a commanding, user-friendly super. His normal buttons mostly reflect how he finished the Street Fighter III series, with a standing hard kick being one of the best pokes in the game, and a jumping medium kick packed with a wide hitbox that's great for crossing up opponents. By the time of the Street Fighter Alpha games in 1995, Ken's arsenal of funky kicks from Super Street Fighter II had been dialed back to an adjusted standing median kick and an overhead axe kick, something that persists through the Street Fighter III series and even into modern games. He does have 2 command normal attacks though, a stepping front kick by pressing forward on the stick and a medium kick, and another distance closing axe kick overhead called the Thunder Kick in most strategy guides, performed by forward and a hard kick. Sadly, neither of these are common in high-level play, particularly the Thunder Kick with its slow reactable startup time, though he can feint the move by holding down the button. Though it doesn't combo, Ken can target combo his standing medium kick into the medium kick axe kick overhead. And famous ancestral special moves of the franchise are of course here, and all of which beg to be compared to other characters that share them. And for good reason, as there are subtleties in the attacks that may not be gleaned by the naked eye. His Hadouken, for example, is a great place to start. A move that would be integral to his zoning game in any other entry of the franchise, it is much more limited use here since the parry system eliminates the opponent's need to jump over them. It's also the slowest in terms of startup and recovery compared to Ryu and Akuma, and a reactive opponent within range can counter-poke him even if they take the hit. This makes the move sometimes drop during the famous low-medium kick to fireball combo unless it occurs at close to point-blank range. The EX version makes up for some of these deficiencies though with added speed, 2 hits, and a knockdown. The Tatsumaki Senpu Kyaku hits multiple times like Akuma's, but doesn't launch for juggles or knock down. In fact, this move is one of his least utilized. The strength of the button will add hits and the EX version add more still, but players have found better combo components while Ken is on the ground. If anything, players can use this as something of a corner escape tool if they're playing against an opponent small enough for him to sail over their heads when they crouch. The strength of this, though, is in the air. Multiple hits can be challenging to parry, and even more so with the airborne EX version, which can juggle foes. Catching unaware players can mean a sneaky cross-up, and air-to-air exchanges usually end in his favor with a follow-up juggle on the ground. His Shoryuken is where the majority of his meterless damage really comes from, and like his EX Hurricane kick, much of it has to do with the juggle capability. Every character in the game can fall into a juggle state if popped out of the air at the right height with the light Dragon Punch, something that became common in Ken play and franchise entries to this day. But the light DP has more capability the higher the skill level of the player and the matchup that Ken finds himself in. When pressed into a corner, for example, every character in the game can be double Dragon Punched by a fast Ken player. Certain cast members like Elena and Q can eat 2 Dragon Punches anywhere on the screen. At the higher levels, however, Ken can borrow frames from his low medium kick to carry the DP, which will hit any character twice in any location. Not the easiest technique to pull off and not essential to his overall strategy, but showy icing on the cake. The medium and heavy Dragon Punches are some of the best anti-air moves in the game with their added hits, with an EX variation adding yet one more. But they're just as useful for combo components as well, which is where many skilled Ken players dig out optimal damage combinations while they move into the supers. And yes, even after all of what was just discussed, Ken has a best-in-class super art that grants him a dominant ground game. So good is this move that it eclipses the other two, even though there are some practical and even silly uses for them. Let's get to them first. Super Art 1, the Shoyu Reppa, or Violent Rising Dragon Fist, according to the franchise Bible Eternal Challenge, is Ken's first super move, dating back to Super Turbo in 1994. Essentially 3 dragon punches in succession, this is a damaging move that can be easily comboed into, but can just as easily miss hits on members of the cast outside of point-blank range. Though one of his more famous moves in the overall franchise, it's his least used super here if there has to be a distinction. Super Art 2 is the Shinryuken, or Supreme Dragon Fist, easily his most powerful move from a damage perspective, as the player can mash the kick buttons for further hits. Though it lacks any sort of forward momentum, this is sort of an all-or-nothing technique that is meant to counter jumping opponents, but has some fun juggle capabilities when combined with Ken's other strengths. The Shinryuken originated as one of his options in the Street Fighter Alpha games beginning in 1995. The prize winner, and only real choice for serious Ken trainees, is Super Art 3, the Shippu Jindai Kyaku, or Swift Gale Thunder Kick. Though low in overall damage output, the move's other benefits are manifold. First, this is an impossibly easy move to combo out of since many of his normals and specials can link into it. Combo videos far and wide can show you piles of ways for Ken to pound on his foes with it. As Ken has one of the most practical target combos in the game with a close medium punch into hard punch, the bread and butter of his tournament gameplay relies on easy confirming short combos like this into the super. Second, with its 2 frames of startup animation, it's one of the fastest moves in the game. So fast, in fact, that a reactive player at high level can even punish block normal moves that are generally safe otherwise. As it will vortex in opponents that are tagged with the first hit if they're on the ground, its speed can mean easy damage even at maximum range. At 3 stocks, it also grants Ken the most EX usage compared to the other super arts, granting Ken the utmost utility that any super can have. Since each individual stock is so short though, Ken players can have one of these in the chamber in near perpetuity. Ironically, this is one of the few changes from Second Impact, as he only had 2 stocks of Super Art 3 prior to Third Strike. He was knowingly made better. Lastly, it gives Ken total command over the playfield in the right hands. Like Chun-Li and her powerful Hoyokusen, Ken's Super Art 3 can effectively pin down opponents in the mid-screen by staying just out of attack range and counter-hitting, a concept we refer to in fighting games as footsies. Post-Super, Ken can leave them in a 50-50 guessing game with well-timed ambiguous jumps. That is, if they're not already thrown into the corner, where he can gain the free time for a taunt, which boosts his attack. This super debuted in New Generation, but was so widely used by the time Third Strike had hit its stride that it became a marquee move for him in every appearance going forward, even if it was simply a component to other moves. These kicks are now a character calling card. Combining all of these factors makes for tense matches against an adept Ken player. With his fast forward dash and the constant threat of Super Art 3, Ken would be a monster even without his powerful meter-free Dragon Punch combos. With higher health than the other top-tier Third Strike gods, he has few noticeable weaknesses in his overall game, save for the fact that practically anyone can pick him up and play and enjoy some success. But many fans agree that Ken has never been better in a Street Fighter game as he is in Third Strike, and the legends of the game's tournament life have used him to catapult their own stardom. Second best in the minds of the uninitiated across the world, perhaps, but in this game, Ken is truly in a masterclass of his own.